Experience has shown, and a true philosophy will always show, that a vast, perhaps the larger portion of the truth arises from the seemingly irrelevant. Greetings, Poe fans. The Potastic 2 are back for another week of interesting commentary. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeanie Smith.
The Potastic 2. And we are going to tackle one of the other degrees that Poe has influenced, which is
the popular culture pop, people.
Pop, pop, pop.
Pop, pop, pop. Not snap, crackle, and pop, but it is along the same lines of the pop culture.
Yes.
Yes, because Edgar, he was a man of many talents, and even though he was dead.
Yes.
Seems like he got posthumously more popular.
I think he did.
I'm like stuck on the alliteration of P right now.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and I don't know if I could do posthumously popular Poe. I did,
yeah,
but
there
if
you
I
go.
did it fast, it would not work.
Yeah. Who knows what that would sound like? We're not even going to try.
All right, so we left off last time talking about the other degree, the first degree, literature, and specifically the origin of the modern detective. And who better yet to move into popular culture into even more modern detectives?
Oh, yes.
And
a man that is more or less, he's old, but nobody really understands how old he truly is.
yes,
But the man behind the mask, the Batman.
yes. Thus, I'm POEman.
Yes, the POEman. Who knew Edgar Allan Poe was going to bring us such popular culture icons years and years later? Well, he personally didn't do it, but we're going to give him the credit.
Absolutely.
Because, he introduced us, and this is the irony that Carmen and I were just discussing, that Edgar Allan Poe, being an American author, who most people thought he was a British author because he wrote mostly in a setting of somewhere in Europe with the French, because his French detective
Right.
was who he first talked about, but he was an American writer. But he influenced British writers who started talking about the detectives, and then the popularity of Sherlock Holmes. Then we had Hercule Poirot,
Yes.
with good old Agatha Christie. And it wasn't until the early 20s, after the stock market crash and the depression and everything, that America got back onto the detective train, we'll call it.
Yes.
And that's when, but they was more focused to try to get the younger adults involved.
Exactly.
It wasn't centered more to an adult area. It was more younger adults, because then you had Franklin W. Dixon, Carolyn Keene, all ghostwriters, but bringing up the Hardy Boys, the Nancy Drew series, the Bobbsey twins, all those during that time
Exactly.
were based on the forensics, the detectives, the whole idea behind Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin.
Exactly. And what's really cool with thinking about DC Comics and how Batman came about, Jeanie was doing some research and found that the Batman came about before Bruce Wayne, and even to that degree, we know exactly where Batman was born. And I found a really cool article that described how he came about. And the title of this is Out of the Batcave and Into the Bronx. And because that's where Batman started, with the creators, the cartoonist Bob Kane and the writer Bill Finger. They met actually at Poe Park in the Bronx, and that's how Batman came to be.
Exactly, because the whole idea of the Batman, Bruce Wayne wasn't really introduced until the Detective Comics was the actual name of the DC series. Detective Comics, which
That's
is what
really cool.
DC stands for.
Yes.
It wasn't until episode 27 in 1939 when Bruce Wayne was having a cocktail or dinner or whatever you want to call it with Commissioner Gordon. And Gordon was having the conversation about how he couldn't understand why he had suddenly this Batman to deal with, even though the Batman was being talked about, but Bruce Wayne wasn't being understood to be the Batman. And it was not one word, it was a hyphenated word, because that was what was so interesting about it. And then it wasn't, you didn't really know the background behind Bruce Wayne, other than in that series and that episode you saw where Bruce Wayne went home back to his manor and became the Batman.
Okay.
So that's when you first found out who his alter ego was. But you understood more about the Batman before you understood about Bruce Wayne. Because the Detective Comics was all about the detective.
Right.
It was all about the justice of it all. Because that's one of the cool things about DC Universe is they built, with the year before was Superman, it was about truth and justice. Because remember in the time frame in the history, Carmen and I both are history people.
Yeah, and right during World War II.
Yeah. This was way back in the 30s. This is the late 20s, early 30s. During that time, you had the rise of organized crime with Al Capone because of Prohibition. Then you had the Great Depression, where that also made the organized crime syndicates so popular. You had World War I. You had the first, I hate to say this, but the first Spanish flu pandemic.
Yes.
That was all going on at the same time. So America, with FDR and his fireside chats, good Lord, the alliteration today.
We love it, though.
And he was trying to bring more of America, the truth, justice, and the American way. So that was the whole motto that was kind of behind the Detective Comics, the DC Universe with Superman and Batman. And so it was more centered on not the person, not the man, but the detective and the justice of it all.
Right. And the comic books themselves really were more short story based, and they were a collection of different short stories. And so, that wasn't necessarily like a Poe influence, but when you think about, he wrote more short stories than he did, novels. He only has one. It's just kind of an interesting.
But it also goes back to the history of it all, because most education, there wasn't a lot of education.
Right.
Horace Mann was the one in Massachusetts who started bringing about public education.
Right.
And that was taking place during the Reformation in the early 1800s when Poe started writing all this.
Yes.
And so I think one of the things that spurned it wasn't in book form, but was in the short stories, because it got to a larger audience. The lack of resources and the lack of education put a real dampener on who your audience was whenever you were doing all the writing, which goes back to feeding into the early 20th century when it's the same thing. You have still, education is not that popular. The Great Depression, the World War, you didn't have a lot of people banking on education. So what better way to get to a broader audience was through a short story. And most of the comics that we think of are the comics that we're used to now, with just the little small flimsy papers, and you got 3 or 4 pages, and you got like panels. It's a storyboard panel is what the comic is.
Yes.
But back in those days when the first comics came out, they were more short story based. It was all about telling the story, not so much the graphic novels. That's what they call them today, that our kids are so popular with.
Absolutely.
Novels.
And the illustrations, even back when comics started, were phenomenal. But now the way that people can do these, especially digitally, with graphic design and such,
the
they're
CGI.
amazing. Yeah.
It's just
really pulls
phenomenal.
you in. Yeah. And some of those that we've actually found were a collection that came out, I believe it was in 2003, published by DC Comics. And this is a really cool tie-in to connecting Batman and Edgar Allan Poe. It's Batman, the Nevermore series, and there were 5 issues, Nevermore 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I have not actually read any of those, but they look really, really cool.
Oh, yes. I mean, anything that you have, because Batman is the epitome of the Gothic, like Edgar Allan Poe.
Absolutely. The dark night,
Exactly.
the darkness.
Print, the dark night. You got the Dracula, you've got the Gothic, you've got the bloody, the gore, all
the
that.
mystery,
Exactly.
ominous, yes.
So I think if there are actually graphic novels or comics in the early 1800s when Edgar Allan Poe was around, he would be the Batman of that time frame.
I agree, yes.
Because the one big thing that I love the most about Batman is that he does not have any superpowers.
Yes, he's just a man.
He's just a man behind a mask. But honestly, he does have a superpower, and this is where I tie it in with Edgar Allan Poe. It's his brain.
Yes.
You know, he is phenomenal with his deductive reasoning.
Absolutely.
And his ideas, and he can see things. And that's the big crossover that I love between Batman and Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
It's because Batman, yes, he had his money. His money made his toys, but that's not who made Batman.
And easier for him to do the things he wanted to do. Yes.
But he started out just because of his brain. His brain was his superpower, and it still is in my mind.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, the man has to be going through some major arthritis issues after he's getting beaten up that much. There's no way. He's not a Superman. You're going to stick some kryptonite on him.
Exactly. Another series that we actually found too, this is just comic related, and it's not necessarily Batman related, but tying into the comic book genre. It's called Graphic Classics, and it's basically adaptations and stories taken from Edgar Allan Poe, put into graphic form. And that came out in 2001. It's from Eureka Productions. And I found a really interesting article that talks about it. And there's an author, M. Thomas Inge, I-N-G-E. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Hopefully I am. But he wrote a book called The Incredible Mr. Poe, and that's one of the books I'm going to try to find. But one of the things that he says in this article that just ties in so much to what Jeanie and I are talking about with Poe's influence, he said, Poe has always had an influential and pervasive presence in American popular culture, from the time of his own contributions to the popular press and literature of his day down to the present. And I just think that is so true. I mean, Poe is always going to have an influence.
Yeah, it's very profound because, and as we were discussing earlier, we were having a conversation with Carmen's husband, that history is always having points of repeating itself.
Yes.
Because after a few years, so many of us, we get lackadaisical. I love that word. We get just so used to that, hey, that happened, but that happened in the past. It's not going to happen again. And that's technically when things usually do happen again, is because people forget things.
Yes.
And not many people are forgetting Edgar Allan Poe. And it's not so much because that, yes, we still influence the younger generation by having some Poe into our education system. But there's a lot of people that are still so much tied into his writing, his genre.
Yes.
You know, we have all been touched at one point or another. We've discussed this with our first episodes, how we were touched personally with certain stories or just certain ideas and about the tragedy of his life.
Yes.
That influenced so much of what he put into writing.
Absolutely. And I think everybody, it doesn't matter what story or poem you read from Poe, you can relate in some essence to something.
Yeah, somebody has always got some kind of connection with a person very next to them. I mean, that's the whole reason the whole 6 degrees of separation with Kevin Bacon came into play.
Right.
You know, everybody has something in common with someone else.
Yes.
You may not see it on the surface, but sometimes you have to look deeper, or sometimes it just comes out of nowhere, like with Edgar Allan Poe, and just smacks you upside the head and say, "Hello, dude, here we are."
And you may just be having a conversation with a stranger riding the bus, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we like this particular thing. You know, it's the same. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't until tying in the whole Hardy Boys thing many years ago. I'm not going to say how many years because I'm not that old, but I do feel that old.
Yeah, and she's making me feel old because I'm older than her, but that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, we joke about this all the time.
Okay. But I was in I was doing community college courses way back in the day when I was doing my criminology degree, and I was the president of the Criminal Justice Club.
Very cool.
And we had to, elect someone for like homecoming queen to represent homecoming court. And one of the girls that was in our club, I had approached because she had we were all about 19 at the time, and she had some past homecoming in her high school years. Me, not so much. I was one of those that I was either gothic or I was just the outlier, but I was never a part of any cliques whatsoever.
Right, yeah.
So we approached her and asked her to do the interview for the homecoming. And so I, as president, I was being, supportive and waiting with her before she was called in for her interview. And so I had never really had a conversation with her that close.
Right.
I'd only met her like 2 weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
So we started talking, and all of a sudden, we found out that we had this major love for the Hardy Boys series.
Oh, that's really neat.
We were like, whoa, what? And then we started talking about how we first started reading them. And then it went into The Outsiders. And then we found out we had such in common with just our literature loves. But on the outside, we had nothing in common. We grew up in 2 different counties. We grew up in 2 different worlds. And it was just amazing that we got connected through literature.
Right.
So it was that degree, and it became the Hardy Boys, which I can honestly say now I can connect back to Edgar Allan Poe.
Absolutely.
So there's another degree.
I know that, especially when I was teaching high school English, when we would do, I call it the Poe unit, but it was really, I tried to intermix Poe into a lot of different things. But when the students would find out how much I loved Poe, they were like, oh, that's really cool. She's not just a stuffy English teacher that has her glasses down on the bottom of her nose, looking down upon the grammar mistakes. But they, I had some that drew me some pictures of the Raven and also of Edgar Allan Poe himself. And I actually have those hanging on my bulletin board, which is kind of cool.
Oh, yeah.
I keep those things.
And it's always about being able to influence.
Yes.
Whether it's being influenced by someone or being the influencer.
Yes.
I always joke with the kids when they started talking about all these influencers on Instagram, Snapchat, whatever now.
YouTube.
Yeah, I'm totally off social media, so I have no idea because I got rid of that 2 years ago and whoa, no. But I finally told the kids one day they were talking about someone and I said, do you not realize who the true influencers are? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm not talking about some 13, 16, 18-year-old that's on social media that's posting all these wonderful pictures and talking about, hey, dude, you need to do this or something. It's like I just jumped off a roof and, I'm still alive. Sorry, that's a little... but that's what I hear sometimes, and I'm thinking, don't do that. But I told him, I said, the true influencers of every life, of every person has been traced back to the first teachers.
Yes.
I said, you can go back way back in the day with Socrates. Socrates was the true first influencer of the world because he introduced democracy.
Yes.
He introduced thinking for yourself and not being influenced to or being railroaded, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons that got him arrested and eventually got him killed, was because he was pushing for his students to think for themselves.
Exactly. And that, as we've seen through history, Galileo, other very important people, we could probably just name names all day long. That's a lot of people died for those causes.
Oh, yes.
Unfortunately.
And one of my favorite Robin Williams shows or movies is Dead Poets Society.
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Yes, Walt Whitman.
Oh, yes. And so, I mean...
Who also was influenced by Poe. That'll be later.
Yeah, that'll be later. We're just, hitting... It's like skipping stones over the water. You can always hit something
Giving
somewhere.
little hints here and there.
Exactly. But pop culture very much is called pop culture because it is popular.
Yes.
And as long as Edgar Allan Poe is still showing up in so many different places, just like with these graphic novels and everything,
yes,
he is still pop culture.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the other 2 series that I just mentioned, they were back in the early 2000s. Well, another series that I actually found at a local comic book store here in Nashville had Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terror, and there's volume 1 and volume 2. And they're published from Ahoy Comics. The first issue was published in 2019, and the second one 2020. And they're very well done. The work is pretty much all in color. There's some black and white, but it's basically some of the illustrators and authors are taking some of Poe's stories and adapting them, or into more of a graphic novel presentation.
Very much so.
And putting a few little of their own commentaries and things. They're doing some political satire of current politics, and also just some stories that are Poe-esque, which I think is still keeping that influence of Poe's genre of the macabre and horror and poetry and everything else alive to today.
And just on the front cover, the first time I saw it, it's very much an allusion, not ILL, allusion,
Yes.
ALL, to Frankenstein.
Absolutely.
Or
Yes.
the Prometheus Man from Mary Shelley.
Yes.
So when you're looking at it, it's all of a sudden you've got the face of Edgar Allan Poe, but you've got Bram Stoker's Dracula with the vampire-esque ideas. You have the
he's got
mask of
a
Frankenstein.
fang tooth with blood coming out.
Exactly. So their mixture, and that's the one thing about having literary freedom in some areas.
Yes.
Is illusion. You have to bring it in. And then the Snifter of Terror, the second volume, when you look at it, it's very much Superman.
Yes.
Because you have the colors of Superman, and
He's
it's got
got
the giant P instead of the S.
Yes, and it's the P on the. It's like his shirt, the starched shirt from the old vaudeville days, where it's
That's
like
not
so
the caravat,
starched.
it's what the other
I
one-
can't remember, but it's
Yeah.
like flipping up out of his shorts. But his suit is blue. He's got a red cape, and then he's got these like
red suspender,
Yeah.
panty looking thing.
yeah, bloomer.
Yeah,
let's
they
call
look
it
like
bloomer.
bloomers.
But he's holding up a car, and then all these other men are like running around. So yes, and
Oh,
again,
and the irony of the car that he's holding up looks like a Studebaker from the 1930s.
yes, it
So
does.
that's very much an a shout out or a tap, tip of the hat off to Superman from 1938.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Yeah, beat Batman by a year.
exactly, he was there first. His was actually in the Action Comics. His was AC.
Okay.
Where Batman came out DC Detective Comics series.
Yeah, that's all very interesting.
Yeah. Most people, you hear the acronyms, you hear AC, DC, not the band.
Yeah.
They're good too.
Or Tesla.
Oh, yeah, or
and-
Tesla and all. Yeah, all those. But you don't really get to know that they're acronyms that stand for something
Yes.
specific.
Yes.
Like DC Comics, actually, the comics was being used twice because it's Detective Comics.
Right.
That was
right.
just weird.
Yeah, that is.
That's why you don't need to say DC Comics. You just need to say DC. Mm-hmm. That annoys me sometimes. I just had to put that out there. Sorry.
Yes. And then we also kind of mentioned on the last episode with, all the people, all the actors who have played, Sherlock Holmes, who was influenced by Poe, and some of those actors have played in Marvel and DC movies.
Yep.
So it's just that all that big tie-in. It's like their acting capabilities, won them all these different roles. Who everything is kind of has that Poe influence. And one of the ones that I think is really important that we talk about for just a minute, but we're going to do probably a whole episode on him way down the road. Think about the old 1966 Batman television series with Adam West. And I can remember, as a kid watching reruns of that, loving it, absolutely loving it.
Yeah, and it's just so odd because I hate to say it, but the sidekick of Robin was so much like the Dupine narrator.
Yeah.
He mostly was just there to make these off colors like Shazam, Batman.
Yes.
Or holy cow. It was like, dude, really?
Holy Poe, Batman.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I hate to say that pretty much Robin was kind of like where the comic relief thing
Yes.
came into play.
Yes.
That one-liner.
It's that bumbling,
Yeah,
kind of the sidekick who is not as intelligent as the prime detective.
Yeah, and his whole point is just to reiterate and emphasize exactly what Batman had just said.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, so if you missed it the first time, here you go. Robin's going to reiterate it yet again.
Exactly. And so, Batman has lots of different villains that he has come against, throughout his career, some of them more prominent than others, especially like Joker.
Oh, yeah.
Catwoman. The Penguin. But one that was a very popular villain on the TV series was Egghead, played by the incredible Vincent Price, and that's who I'm talking about. We're going to be doing another episode on him, like all about him, because
talk about iconic goth.
Yes, and tied to Poe in so many ways. It's like they've got to be related somehow.
Oh yes, I mean Vincent Price. You cannot think of Vincent Price and not think of terror.
Yes,
not think of the gothic, the horror. Mm-hmm. He was the man behind the voice.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have these iconic actors that always bring us their voice first. I mean, James Earl Jones. You can't think of James Earl Jones and not how me personally can't think of Star Wars.
Oh, absolutely.
You got Darth Vader. There's only one voice of Darth Vader, and that's James Earl Jones.
Absolutely.
And then of course you've got Sam Elliott. There's a voice you can't do without.
Yes.
And then the first James Bond, Sean Connery.
Yes.
I mean, his voice, you hear it, and the first thing that you pop into is the detective of 007.
Oh, exactly. And even
Fleming.
like Charlie's Angels back from the 70s, the voice of Charlie, John Forsythe.
Yeah. Oh, I loved him on Dynasty.
Yes.
Yes.
But we should not digress too much.
Yeah, sorry.
Voices.
We'll get a little too far in. Voices themselves could be a whole other episode.
Oh, yes. But yes, Vincent Price voice for the
Egghead.
And the Thriller song back from 1982.
Michael Jackson, talk about another pop culture icon.
Yes.
Right there.
But Egghead first came on to the Batman series. It was during the second season. So he didn't show up in the first season. And then he made one other appearance. And the second time he came on there, he was actually I think engaged or married. The first time his kind of sidekick was his secretary, and her name was Miss Bacon, very apropos.
Eggs and bacon.
But he is, Egghead's villainy was really situated around, he was extremely one of the most brilliant villains that Batman ever had to deal with. His brain was too big for his head. That's why his head was so big.
And I could also point in there too, if you think about Egghead, Edgar Allan Poe. Mm-hmm. Because Edgar, Egghead. Most people, and I hate to say it, we always give nicknames to people with certain names.
Oh, absolutely.
And Edgar could always be known as Egghead.
Mm-hmm.
That's what was one of the popular abbreviations that cruelty of children can do to names.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah.
Absolutely.
That's also something that's very iconic to me is the Egghead Edgar.
Yes.
It was all about his brain and his thoughts. And remember what I said, Batman was all about his big brain is his superpower, not the car.
Exactly. And so the second, just looking this up, the second time that he came on, he was engaged to a lady named Olga. So she was kind of his sidekick in the second one.
Right.
But he only made the 2 appearances. Vincent Price played him both times, was very popular on the series.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is you have so many that can make their mark with only a few things. Mm-hmm. It could actually went a whole different direction. It could have actually caused more problems and lost them the popularity.
Exactly.
So they knew how to use them well.
And one of the things that Vincent Price said of being on the show was, this is quoted from Vincent Price, "I was thrilled to be on the Batman series. I really thought that it was one of the most brilliant television series ever done, and I still think so. The imagination and the creativeness that went into these shows was extraordinary. They were ahead of their time."
Yes, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, because during that time frame, they weren't relying on the computer graphics influence.
No, not at all.
They were relying on the actual actors and how they did the method acting.
Yes.
It was all about method with their voice, their body, the body language, all of that. And yes, some of it is a little cringeworthy in places. I will agree that, like when Batman and Robin are trying to, climb up the side of a building, and it's technically, you can see that it's on its side and they're just walking.
Exactly.
Some of it's a little cringeworthy, but at the same time, it was mostly always about the story.
Yes.
Which is one of the things with Batman. It's always about the story. It's not about the man. And that goes back to Edgar Allan Poe. It's always about the story. But he's bringing the man into the story.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is who Edgar Allan Poe truly is.
Absolutely.
The man behind the story.
Yes.
And the story of the man.
And so you can see that, Poe's influence in pop culture is phenomenal. And, all the little kind of gift items you can find at different of the gift shops at some of the museums and just even just on Amazon, that kind of thing. I have all the stuffed animals. I have a raven puppet. These things just transcend into, they're timeless.
Exactly. It's like being stuck in a continuous time warp.
Yes.
Of Edgar Allan Poe. And I mean, you can walk into a comic book store and still find comics that are centered of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
You can see new stories being created to influence and to, what's the word I'm looking for? Accentuate.
Yes.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you have that, then you truly have hit a theme. You have hit the popular. You have hit a cultural icon.
Yes.
And as long as you have that and it can sustain itself,
yes,
no matter whether it's through Edgar Allan Poe and his original works or just the idea of Edgar Allan Poe and his work.
Absolutely.
You have made your mark.
Yeah, and I want to touch on one of the words you just used, time warp.
Exactly.
Meaning kind of a little kind of bridge to our next episode, which is going to be sci-fi.
Oh, yes, the science behind the science fiction.
Yes.
And how much do we not have an influence now? And it started in the same time errors and all this, because as we were discussing with the whole Detective Comics, the whole idea of the Hardy Boys and all that being geared toward the young adults, and then who was the main guy on the radio that really, really caused a whole panic that we were actually being invaded by aliens.
Yes.
With War of the World.
Oh, yes. Mr. Orson Welles.
Yeah, so most people think sci-fi just came about with the early 60s, but no.
It's way back. Way back.
We can still go way, way back with whole Jules Verne.
Absolutely.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea back in the day. 80 days.
Yes.
Around the world in 80 days.
Yes, yes. And Poe himself.
Oh, yes. Poe has that influence, too. But yet, we will digress and not go into that, because that's the whole next episode.
Absolutely.
But we warp into the future.
That's exactly right. And so, and as we said, one of the episodes later down the road, it will be all about the influence that Poe had on Vincent Price, and then Vincent Price's influence also around the world of the gothic horror, macabre, and such.
Even science fiction.
Yes, absolutely. You can tie it all together.
Yeah, it's that whole 6 degrees of separation.
Yes,
those 6 degrees are not as far apart as most people think.
Yes, it's kind of
scary,
yeah, but very surreal.
And it actually plays into the whole, in the real world of quantum physics.
Yes.
I don't know what physics is, but physics.
It's a new science.
Yeah, the whole idea of that time is not linear, but it's actually spiral.
Yes.
It is a circular pattern that your future is your past and your past becomes your future.
Yes. Everything is cyclical,
Exactly.
as Jeanie kind of talked about earlier.
Yeah, so very much so.
So we are on Facebook. We are on Twitter, 6 Degrees of Poe. Please join us there. We also have our website of 6degreesofpoe.com.
Yes, where along the lines we have our recipes that we did for our
Halloween special.
We will be posting a couple recipes, not a lot, but we will be having a special Christmas episode where we're going to have some readings and some tie-ins that we don't want to give away too much. No. You can check out our website, our Facebook, our
There's
Twitter.
A little hint on there now.
And eventually, as soon as... we're still a little sporadic, but as you know, this time of year is always very weird.
Yes, it's crazy busy.
But we will be offering our own type of artistic ideas, our own stories. We will actually have some friends who will be posting their own kind of caricatures and artwork and stuff for sale on our websites and ideas. So please continue to check us out. Share our ideas with friends, family, whatever. We need our Edgar Allan Poe fans.
Yes.
We need our Poe fans
and
to
people
follow the
that
Poetastic
don't
too.
realize how many different eras and genres that Poe influenced, that it's like you may not be a fan, but you will become a fan.
Exactly. We will make it so.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to throw this science fiction thing in there. So
Absolutely. No, I love it.
only certain people will
And
might do that.
on our Christmas episode, we're going to be making an announcement about something that we're going to be doing in 2022 that we hope you're very excited about. It's an addition to what we're doing with our podcasts.
Yeah, it'll be very much I don't want to say completely interactive, but more an audience and the Poetastic 2 combination.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So we hope you will enjoy because we enjoy it ourselves.
Absolutely. And we'd love to talk to many people out there in the world about Poe.
Yeah, and that's how you make ideas happen is to talk to other people. And some people might have ideas you never thought of.
Exactly. So, as for the Batman, the POEman,
The POEman.
they are riding off in the Batmobile together.
Yes, they've both donned their masks. They both donned their capes.
Yes.
And they are ready to go off into the sunset.
Yes, and save the world.
Exactly.
So, for this episode, we are
Poe out! The 99 are with dreams, content but the hope of the world made new is the 100th man who is grimly bent on making those dreams come true.